All right, we'll go on. Holding by Pirke Avos, ethics for our fathers, as it's known. Again, we're on. Holding by Pirke Avos, ethics of our fathers. We're in chapter 2, Mishna 16. Right, this is part 45. There'll be a part 46, 47, 48, whatever we'll speak about over here. Again, we're holding by Pirke Avos, ethics for our fathers. We are in chapter 2, Mishna 16. And we've been speaking about the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination. The Mishna says in the name of Rabbi Yeshua, says, an evil eye, evil inclination, hatred of others, remove a person from this world. So we've been speaking about the evil inclination, a lot of different aspects of the evil inclination, but simply we meant, or we mentioned, that what does evil inclination want? As Tosas Yontiv explains, one of the great commentators on the Mishnah, Tosas Yontiv says majority of a person's desire. Now, what does evil inclination want? The evil inclination, known as the angel of death, the Satan, whatever you want to call him, his job in the world is trying to tempt man, right? Trying to tempt man to sin, to get them, get them to do terrible things, whatever it is, or at least go against God and subtly or more openly, try and get us to make, bad decisions and all that. So he wants to come and try and trap you, right? Try and destroy us by convincing us doing the wrong thing, is okay, and how we can justify it. This is very good for Yom Kippur, because by Yom Kippur we're asking for atonement. Right? So asking for atonement, let's make it easy, between man and God. What does the person have to do? At the very least, says the Rambam, a person has to admit they've done something wrong. Right? At the very least, they have to admit that they've done something wrong. Now, according to the Rambam, everything else is extra. Why? Because again, we make all kinds of excuses why it was permissible to do X, Y, or Z. Right? Why it's permissible, so let's say Lashon Hara against somebody. Why it's permissible, whatever we've done, we are very good. We are very good at justifying what we do, and therefore, since we're very good at it, God, what can God say? God can say, "Listen, what difference does it make? You did it." Yeah. Right? You actually did it. So you're going to say, no, you can't deny what you did. Right? Just like we're recording now. Everything's being recorded. Gemara says, and you have two angels following you everywhere. Right? They are recording everything, even though, God does not need the heavenly court, doesn't need anybody. He can judge a person after they die and say, listen, you did this, you did that, did the other thing. You can play the video. Right? He doesn't need messengers, but he uses messengers. That's what angels are. Different hierarchy of angels, etc. But nonetheless, he uses them for whatever he wants. Right? So God himself, again, it's only through humility that God convenes the heavenly court. Doesn't need to, right? Because God knows, one of the 13 principles of faith, God knows thoughts of man. So if God knows the thoughts of man, that means everybody, Jew or non-Jew. He knows what our thoughts are. He knows what we've done. So he's going to judge it however he judges it. But bottom line, does he need a heavenly court? No. Right? Does he need anyone, to write things down? No. But just like a court in this world, as long as they're not corrupt, right? Just like a court, what are they going to do? Person goes into court, you got to hear the witnesses, right? You got to hear a testimony. And then the judge or the jury will decide, is he guilty, he's not guilty, right? But they have to hear the evidence. Now, doesn't God know the evidence? God knows the evidence, right? The Torah says, let's see what's going on in Sodom, right? Who's the we? Who's the plural? We, the English we, make fun of the English here, right? The English we. So Rashi over there says, who's God talking to? The heavenly court. Yeah, and what Rashi says further, that God in his modesty, right? In his modesty, convenes the heavenly court. convenes the heavenly court. And before he makes a decision, he's going to convene them. Right? Which in and of itself is a big miracle because God doesn't need to convene anybody, right? First, the 13 principles of faith, right? According to the Rambam, God's absolute. God's absolute, he has no need. If he has no need, what does he need the heavenly court for? Yeah, he doesn't need the heavenly court. What does he need angels for? He doesn't need them, right? To use messengers. He has them, right? He created them, obviously, for a reason, but really, he doesn't need anything, right? He doesn't need them. So God doesn't need a heavenly court or anybody to come see what's going on in Sodom. The assumption is, well, maybe God doesn't know what's going on. Not true. God for sure knows what's going on. If God for sure knows what's going on, what's the problem? Right? What's the problem over here? God knows what's going on. So, essentially, God doesn't need messengers. Okay. Now, even if God doesn't need messengers, so the commentaries say that even though God doesn't need messengers, why does he have the heavenly court? Why does he do it that way? Because that's what goes on in this world. That's exactly what goes on in this world. Yeah. In other words, just like an earthly court, yeah, you got to hear the evidence before you judge, right? Even though judges could be corrupt, okay. But in general, that's the way it works. They'll hear the evidence. They'll decide based on the evidence. Very good. They'll decide based on the evidence. Guilty, not guilty, whatever. So do the heavenly court. Heavenly court does the same thing, right? Ramchal brings down in Derech Hashem. Heavenly court does the exact same thing. Very good. So why? Why does God need a heavenly court? Essentially, God doesn't need a heavenly court. He doesn't need it. Yeah. Yeah, but again, it shows humility. So what does God do? God has angels following us on a regular basis. And they're going to dictate what happened, what the person did, where they were holding, at the time. So a person can't say, we've mentioned this many times, just mention again because it's good before Yom Kippur, a person cannot say they didn't do it. Right? That a person can never say. They can't say, I didn't have my hand in the cookie jar. God says, really? Let's play the video again. Hands in the cookie jar. No, you don't understand. It was right next to it. It was it? No, it was in the cookie jar. What was it doing in the cookie jar? So you come up with 100 excuses why. Right? And that's really the point. Right? In other words, when a person has out-of-body experience, everyone says the same thing. Everybody first, the body hovers, the soul hovers over the body, right? But even before that, a person's life flashes before their eyes. Everybody says this: Jew, non-Jew, child, adult, male, female, Christian, Buddhist. They all say the same thing. Their life flashes before their eyes. Now, every last thing they've done at that point flashes before their eyes. Okay, so now the question is going to be, when it's time for judgment, and God's going to look at the person, we just went through judgment, right, last week on Rosh Hashanah, right? God is going to look at everything we've done. He's going to judge it the way, he sees it, the way he's going to call it. He's going to judge it where we were holding, right? What we were doing. Now, based on that, after a person dies, the ultimate judgment, a person can never say, I didn't do this. That's not going to be in the vocabulary of the soul. They're not going to be able to say that. Yeah, they'll be embarrassed at everything they've done because, again, it flashes before their eyes. They see every last thing they did. Right now, it's going to be corroborated by these angels. Because God, before judgment, is going to say, okay, bring out all his mitzvahs. And all these angels that he created, we're going to see one day. I don't know, maybe when I'm 97, we'll see. Yeah, that in Pirke Avos says, do a mitzvah, create an angel, a good angel. Right? It depends how you did the mitzvah. Stronger, weaker, whatever. You transgress. He created a black angel. Right? What's a black angel? Again, it'll either be stronger or weaker depending on the desire. Depending on the desire of the person. Very good. Then God's going to weigh them. He's going to weigh what you did and how you did it. God is going to weigh it. And then he's going to make a judgment. Yeah, potentially, probably not today, but potentially, instead of sending the soul to Gehenna, to hell, to get fixed up, that's what hell certainly, that's what it is. It's a process of fixing up the soul. Very good. Yeah, and then it should have a portion of the world to come. Or the soul can say, give me another chance. Let me go back. Maybe the soul will be reincarnated, right? Very hard to say that today, right? Because at least as far as I understand, souls aren't coming back today. This is probably the last chance. Last chance for the soul in this world, before the Messiah comes. But with all that being said, could have a choice. Could have a choice. Go through punishment, up there, suffer whatever they have to suffer, and then, hopefully they go into paradise. Right? In other words, if a person's really that bad, the soul gets obliterated. So we're not talking about people that are that bad. Most people are probably not that bad. So there'll be something left of the soul. The soul will go in, eventually, will go into paradise. But again, what's the problem here? What's the problem here? We will justify in this world, and maybe even in that world also, maybe soul will try and justify why it did whatever it did. But certainly in this world, we are very good, very, very good, exemplary of justifying what we did and why we did it. Now, the problem is it a true justification? That is the problem. Why is it a problem? Because who says it's justified? You're going to think it's justified. Yeah? Maybe in our warped, understanding, we'll say, no, you have to understand, Ray was a Lashon Hara, I really said that. Right? Well, justifying many different ways. Justifying it in many different ways does not mean God's going to look at it and say, oh, really? That's what you thought? No. Right? Not going to happen. Right? I mean, God could agree in theory. In theory. He could say, good excuse. Okay, I'll take that. I'll take down the punishment. Not the full punishment. Maybe I'll take down some of it. Or God can say it's not an excuse. That's not an excuse. So in this world, we'll have 150,000 different excuses why we did what we did. Some of them could be justified. Others may not be justified. Maybe a lot of them won't be justified. But what happens? Why am I mentioning this? Because we are biased. We have our own biases. Yeah, you'd have to ask someone, doesn't know the situation, someone, outside the situation. Did I act in the right way? This, doing this and doing that. Yeah, they'll be objective because they don't have any bias. Yeah, but when we do things, when we say things, let's say, when we say things, isn't it someone can push our buttons? Isn't it that we have this evil inclination, right? And really, we want to do something. We want to say something, right? I mentioned many times when a person says something, even though they're going to say, oh, I shouldn't have said that. Yeah, let's say, let's say they say something where they're going to get called on it, where they should get called on. Yeah, but what do? What do they do in general? They react. Yeah, reaction is bad. Now, when they say something, because they don't think, they just react. So when they say something, what happens? When they say something, they can't say, I didn't mean it. Right? And I've spoken about this a lot. Just mention one point. And the reason you can't say, I didn't mean it, is because that's really what you thought. The problem is, your lips, your tongue, your mouth did not stop you from saying it. Fact is, you meant it. You meant it. Someone, there's a story, whatever. I'll just mention this. I spoke about it a few years ago back in the day when it happened. There was a basketball player, live streaming a video. So obviously if you're live streaming a video, like we are, so, you got to be careful. Should be careful what you say. And I don't know, something happened and made some meta comment. Yeah, so the NBA stepped in and basically canceled his contract for the rest of the year, even though he was injured, whatever. And that's what he said. Right? That's what he said. Now we'll cut to the chase. That's what he thought. How do I know? Right? People say, oh, what do you think? You're a prophet? Right? Nobody's a prophet. No one's the son of prophets, right? So you can say, how do you know what's in a person's heart? I didn't spoke about this. Somebody or whatever. Maybe I spoke about it last week, or I spoke to someone about it. Definitely, spoke to someone about it. So either way, right? The question is, and I got in trouble for saying this, but it doesn't really matter, right? And that is, how do you know what's in a person's heart? How do you know? You can't say what's in a person's heart, right? What's this no gay to? What's this connected to, right? Someone told me that when they go to services, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, right? In some synagogues, you have to have a ticket to go, right? You got to pay a certain amount, whatever it is. You have a ticket, you get a seat. Very good. Someone says, the more money you pay, the closer you get to the AC. I can't make this up. Yeah, the more money you pay, the closer you get to the AC. So I said, great. Why don't you just take a portable AC and bow down to it? They're like, ah. They're like, ah. Well, you're being very cynical. I said, I wasn't being cynical. You just said, I'm going to take what you said literally. The more money you pay, the closer you get to the AC. So why are you in synagogue? You're there for the air conditioning? Or you're there to pray? Now, there are plenty of Jews, probably older Jews, right, that, maybe some of the grandparents that were somewhat religious or whatever, that they have inside of them, spark inside of them, that will tell them, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, you got to be in synagogue. Maybe not the whole time, maybe some of the time, whatever. You have to be there, right? Younger generation, a lot of people don't go to synagogue, right, in the secular world. Right, some do, but probably a lot don't. Either case, what are they doing there? Right? I get in trouble for saying this. What are they doing there? They're doing it because the parents told them they got to come. Okay? Right? Let's say it's true. Let's say parental obligation. Even if they're older, doesn't matter. Parental obligation. Honoring their parents by going to synagogue. Yeah, at some point they probably won't do that because, whatever. They don't want to do it. But let's say for a certain amount of time they do it. A number of years they do it. Why are they there? Why in the world are they there? They don't even know what Rosh Hashanah means. Everyone's like, yeah, dip the honey in the apple. Very good. But they don't know what it means. They don't know about judgment. They don't know about life or death. Right? That's what we say. Una sana soike. Right? Musaf. We said on Rosh Hashanah. Yeah, who by fire? Who by what? It's by life and death. Judgment. You'll be an idiot. You read the whole prayer book. What's it talking about? Judgment. That's the whole prayer book. That's what it's talking about. Left and right. All the piyutim, all these liturgical poems. What's it all about? Judgment. Making God king. Yeah? That's what it's about. These people don't have a clue, right? They still don't have a clue. Okay, they're there for whatever reason. But if they don't keep kosher, they don't keep Shabbos, they're eating treif and this and that. So what are they doing there? They're going to say they're there for a spiritual experience. Okay? And maybe it's going to lead to something. Okay, maybe. You would have told me 20 years ago, I would have said no chance. Never happened. Yeah, maybe I mellowed a little bit, but not too much. Not too much. So I would still say very little chance. Very little chance. But they're there because something inside them tells them they have to be there. For whatever reason. But there are a lot of Jews don't even show up. Yeah? Right? So again, people that you don't know what's in their heart. Okay, you're right. I'm not a prophet, not the son of a prophet. Yeah? Yeah. But they're not keeping kosher, they're not keeping Shabbos, they're not keeping the festival right. So what are they doing there? They understand about life and death. They know they're going to be here tomorrow. They know they can get a bad judgment and die. Or people just scoff it off, say, well, whatever. They don't have a clue. They don't have a clue. So what are they doing there? Good question. I think it's a valid question. Yeah? For whatever it's worth. They're there to pray? I don't know what they're there for. Maybe some spiritual experience, maybe. So someone tells me it could potentially lead them back to Torah mitzvahs. Okay. I can hear that. For most of them, they're not going anywhere. What is God giving them? I heard a great rabbi ask this question, which was I asked the same question. So what does God give them? What in the world does he give them? They show up. Okay, very good. They showed up. So, God gave them a check. They showed up. Okay. They got a check. Very good. But what is he going to give them? Maybe he'll give them death. Maybe. Or maybe he'll continue them on the same path. Give them more of what they're getting now. That's what this rabbi said. Who's 10 times greater than me and then I'll be in 10 lifetimes. Yeah? But he asked the same question. I'm very glad I heard the question. He said God's going to give them more of whatever they have. you know, more money, more desire. I don't know, whatever it is, whatever it is. So you know what my question is on that, which I asked before. If they're getting more of it, how can they repent? They have a 99% chance of not repent because they're giving more of it. They're getting more injections of it. So how's it possible for them to repent? It's possible. Unless God takes away the free will, like he did by Pharaoh, right? That makes the question stronger. If God took away the free will, how can he punish them? Good, that's not the topic. Yeah? So God gives them more of it. Okay. Now, what are the odds of the person going down that path unless something majorly traumatic happens? Or whatever, you got to drop a nuclear bombshell on top of them to wake them up. And let's say it's going to wake them up. What's going to happen? Well, that's it. They sink into a spiritual abyss. That's what it is. They're in a spiritual abyss. And finished. There's not going to be anything left of them in the next world. For most people. Certainly for most Jews, unless they repent. Right? Nothing, I don't think there's anything to talk about. Others will say, come on, at the end of the day, so repent. All right. I'm not such a big believer in that. But either way, what's the point over here? To justify what they do. It doesn't really appeal to me. Doesn't really speak to me. All right, you're talking about, secular people, whatever they're going to say. What about a religious person? Let's talk about a religious person. Of course they spoke badly against them. Of course they said things against them. But they had a comment. Look what they did. Look what they said. Yeah? So we could justify it 1,000,000 times over. 1,000,000 times over all the different things that we did in all the situations we've been in. Now, some of them, I would say, would have better justification. Others probably have no justification. Right? In either case, what's going to happen? You're in trouble. Why are you in trouble? Because you're trying to justify something that's not justifiable. Right? So when you look, on Yom Kippur, when we beat our chest and we say, right? You beat your chest. You say, for this sin I've done it in front of you. You have to admit you did something wrong. This is exactly why the Rambam says, all you have to say is, I sinned on a Torah level. On a Torah level, you say you sinned, that's good enough. Why? Because it's very hard. It's very hard in general to admit we've done anything wrong. Period. Very, very hard. That being the case. Yeah, where's the Yetzer Hara coming? Where's the evil inclination coming? Now, the evil inclination will come in and tell you, you had a right to say so. Or even if you don't have a right to say it, per se, you feel bad. You feel angry, right? Someone's done something. Maybe a lot of things have piled up over the years. Yeah, someone you have to have a relationship with, let's say. Things have piled up over the years. You really never got out of your system. Yeah, and things annoy you. So one day, what happens? You blow up. Potentially, you blow up. Yeah. Now you're going to say, the person had it coming. Look at all the things they did. Yeah. But let's say you never spoke to them about it, or whatever the case is. Okay. You yourself in that scenario, 100% feel justified. Because they cause you pain. They cause you trouble. They cause you aggravation, right? What source of the greatest pride a person would have in general? Their kids. Yeah, and what's the greatest source of their aggravation? Same thing, they're kids. Yeah, it goes both ways. Yeah, but even so, right? Not talking about kids here, but in general. So, person has the aggravation built up, and then eventually they explode, or potentially explode. Yeah, so now they're going to say, of course. Why they do it? Something triggered it, obviously. Yeah, even if something triggered it, but what happened? What happened in general? What happened in general is a person got fed up. They're under pressure. They have other aggravation going on. Whatever it may be, they feel justified. They 100% feel justified. But at the same time, what happened? Now they create other problems. Okay, but even without that, the person will give you 10 reasons because they've harbored it inside for so long, they'll give you 10 reasons, 20 reasons why they're justified. Now, let's say they explode. Yeah, or even if they don't explode, but then they say something and they embarrass the person in public. That's it. You embarrass someone in public, what happens? You lose your portion of the world to come. It's not justifiable. Yeah, totally not justifiable. You destroy somebody. It's akin to murder, right? Even though murder in general, you don't lose your portion of the world to come. There is repentance. Yeah, Rabbeinu Yonah says the gates of repentance. Nonetheless, this is an offshoot of murder, as the Gemara says, because when you embarrass someone, they turn red, and they turn white, then they turn red. Red meaning blood, so like you totally destroyed them, right, in public. And anyone who's ever been embarrassed in public knows the feeling, or been embarrassed in general. Yeah, Rabbeinu Yonah takes a step further. He said, yeah, he holds that if you embarrass someone in public, you lose your portion of the world to come. Yeah. Now, problem is that for murder itself, you don't. As long as you need to repent, obviously. But that's not something you lose your portion of the world to come for. This is an offshoot of murder, at best. It's an offshoot. Now, people say, I've been embarrassed, it's worse than murder. Okay, but it's an offshoot of murder. Since it's considered an offshoot, it's a very big chiddush, very big novelty here, to say you're going to get, you lose your portion of the world to come, because you didn't murder the person literally. They're still alive. But you divorced them, you killed them, right? Essentially, you killed them, right? In other ways. Again, somebody reacted to something, and somebody felt they had a right to say it, and they didn't. Now, if they would have thought twice about it, let's say if they were more calm or whatever, maybe they wouldn't have said it. Maybe. For whatever reason, they said it. Okay. Now, even if they said it, right? Even if they said it, couldn't they say, beyond the shadow of a doubt, why the person actually deserved it? Yeah. Can't they decree, or not say decree, but can't they say, and give any number of reasons why they deserve it? And not only that, they're going to tell you they're justified. Now, if you were to ask them under other circumstances, would you have said it? Maybe they wouldn't have said it. Okay. But in this case, they did. So now you're going to call them on it. You're going to call them on it. So now you call them on it. Now you call them on it. What happens? What happens? That person is going to tell you 10 different reasons why it was okay. They're not going to think they did anything wrong. Right? Maybe they're still angry. So you really can't, reason with them. But let's say they'll give you 10 reasons, at least, why they're justified in what they did. Right? That's the work of the inclination. Now, in their mind, they're justified. But if you think of the bigger picture, why isn't that a lack of emunah? If you think of the bigger picture, why are they allowed to do it? Yeah. Why aren't they saying, well, there's a test and I got to work on it, it's what God's sending me? Why aren't they saying that? Because they're angry. Yeah. You never talk to a person when they're angry. Right? You can try, it never works. You got to wait till they calm down, till they're rational. Yeah, when a person's angry, the Gemara says, they could be on the opening, of Gehenna, and they won't change. They'll still be angry. Yeah. Right? You gotta wait till they calm down. You don't talk to a person until they calm down. So once they calm down, then you can have a conversation. But when that person's angry, you're gonna ask, you ask them, they may not sound so rational. But let's say they do. Let's say they sound rational, and they say this person had it coming. 100% they had it coming. And they deserved it. Why did they deserve it? They'll give you 10 reasons why. Maybe they'll give you 20 reasons why. Right? And we do this all the time. If you go through the list, as I said before, you go through the list of Yom Kippur, on Vidui, confession, on Yom Kippur, I've done this sin, whatever it is, and then you mention the sin. And you beat your chest, right? You beat your chest symbolically. Very good. Now, some things where, probably affect us more that we've done. There could be things that really we haven't done. Okay, in either case, even if it affects us and we did it, are we going to say, no, my bad? Should never have been done. Should never have been said. Now, you got to be strong to be able to do that. Yeah, we're not talking about people with mental health issues here. Yeah, this is going to be a very hard thing to do. Right? It's a very hard thing to say, to admit you've done something wrong. Yeah. It's going to be a hard thing to do. 100%. 100%. But a person should feel better. Man, okay, I did something wrong. Right? Now, if you did something wrong against someone else, you have to appease them. Try and appease them. Yeah, to the best of your ability. But you have to mean it. Right? And this question comes up. Let's say someone did something against you, caused you damage, right? Let's say. They caused you damage. And they asked for forgiveness. Now, that's a big thing already. They asked you for forgiveness. Okay. But you see through the body language how they say it. They're just saying the words. They're saying the words. So what does that mean? It means they don't really mean it. That's what it means. They don't mean it. Right? Now, this is a big thing for Yom Kippur. If someone were to ask you before Yom Kippur, really, if I did anything wrong, but they're saying the words. And and they know, and everyone else knows, they don't really mean it. Do I have to forgive them? And I would say the answer is yes. You don't have to love them, right? You can't hate them in your heart if they're a Jew, right? You don't have to be best friends with them. You should forgive them, because that's a hard thing to do. Going up to someone and saying, or calling them or whatever and saying, to forgive me if I did anything wrong, it's a hard thing to do, in general. Or if you want to make amends, even better. Yeah, not just saying, if I offend you, listen, I know I did this, I didn't really mean it, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, it's a very hard thing to do. Someone asked me the other day, what if they don't ask for forgiveness? Yeah? Do I have to forgive them? Now, I didn't go into this whole thing, about what we say before we go to sleep. Before you go to sleep, you forgive everybody for ever done anything to you, right? And this Gilgul, this reincarnated soul, or any other reincarnated soul, or whatever. So you shouldn't have to ask for forgiveness. Yeah, why do I have to ask for forgiveness in the first place? Right? If religious people say this before they go to sleep, why do you have to ask for forgiveness? So I asked this great rabbi once, many, many years ago, and he said how they meant it. Yeah? Do they really mean it? Think about it. You go to sleep, you're dead tired, whatever. Right? You take a cheshbon and nefesh, take a self-counting before you go to sleep. Right? What you did, I talked to people, this, that, very good. And in the end, okay, now you're going to say, Kriyan Shema Lamita, right? You're going to say the Shema before you go to sleep. So the whole thing you say. The whole thing you say, right? Before you say the Shema, there's a whole paragraph there. Right? You can look it up. Very easy. It's in every prayer book. Yeah. And it says, if anyone did anything against me, I forgive them. Right? So you shouldn't have to ask for forgiveness from anybody. But again, think about it for yourself. Think about what some people may have done to you. That people have done to you. Right? Let's say. And you say this prayer. You say, I forgive anyone, this and that. Okay. Now I'll ask you the $1,000,000 question. Think about that person who did damage to you, whatever it is. Even that day, someone bothered you, whatever. And now you're saying the words of forgive anybody who ever did anything to me. So I'm gonna put everyone on the spot. Yeah? Put everybody on the spot. Think of someone who did something bad against you. whatever it may be. I'm not saying in trauma. We're not necessarily talking trauma here, right? But whatever. Someone did something against you. Yeah, someone said something against you. Yeah. Now you're saying this prayer. You're saying this prayer. Anyone who ever did anything against me, I forgive them. Now think of what that person just did. Now, when you think about what the person just did, you forgive them or not? Or these just you're gonna think, come on, these are the words of the prayer. I have to say it. Very good. Yeah. Very, very good. So what happens? Did you really forgive them? Probably not. Right? I'm gonna call that a sucker bid. It's a sucker bid. Yeah, all the money I don't have, I put down, I put down on the table. So you don't forgive them. Why not? Because you're mad. You might be justifiably mad. I'm not saying it's not justifiable. Someone said something against you, whatever. Someone put you down. Even better. Someone put you down. I made you feel like a piece of dirt. So now you're dead tired to think about what happened during the day. You take note of that also. How'd you react? What'd you do? Blah, blah, blah. Very good. Now you're going to say it. And now you're going to say, I forgive anybody. Anybody, even if this person made you feel like a piece of dirt. Did you mean it? You didn't mean it. I can tell you, deep in your heart, you didn't mean it. Because I know thoughts of man. Imagine if I did. Bad enough I know my own thoughts. Yeah. But we're not going to go there. So, you didn't mean it. So you have to ask for forgiveness. We're going to say, so why do we say it? Oh, good question. Why do we say it? So it's a good thing. Maybe one day I'll speak about where all these prayers came from and, how it was put together, in saying it. But the reality is, deep in our heart, we should forgive them. We should forgive them and make the repentance process a lot easier. Right? Because no one's going to have to ask us for forgiveness. Make it a lot easier. Yeah, but we're complicated people. Yeah, every person's their own world, right? That's what the Mishna Sanhedrin says. God created the world for me. I.e. for me, not anyone else. Yeah. I'm not talking high levels here. I want to know how many people, when they say it, actually mean it. As this great rabbi told me, people don't mean it when they say it. That's what he meant. He said, halavai, they meant it. Meaning, they probably don't mean it. That's why you have to ask for forgiveness. Yeah? Still think it's a good question. But that's the answer. That is the answer. Say, wow, we got a long way to go. Very good. A few days still before Yom Kippur. Okay. Does that mean I have to love everyone? Doesn't the Torah say, love the neighbor like yourself? If a person's married, you got to love your spouse more than yourself. That's even harder. That's even harder. Why? Nobody loves anyone more than themselves. We're all egotistical. We're all narcissists in a certain way. It's all about us. The world revolves around us. Yeah. The fact you have to love someone more than yourself? What does that mean? Certainly, for a guy, he's got to do certain things, even if he wouldn't do it for himself, he's got to do it for his spouse. In general. Not saying forbidden things or whatever. In general. If that's what the spouse wants and it's, it's in the realm of Torah and this and that, you should do it. You should give in. Now, certain things you probably won't want to give in. Okay, they have to be discussed. Very good. But nobody loves anyone more than themselves. Nobody. So this is a hard union. Right? And, and the reason is because it's give and take. And sometimes, you got to give in. You don't necessarily want to give in. But isn't, we call it shalom bias, family meant harmony. Isn't family harmony worth a lot? Sure. It's worth a lot. Person does a lot of things for the sake of family harmony. Other things maybe they don't want to do. Maybe halachically they don't have to do. It depends. Yeah, it depends. So a person will have to learn, how to pick their battles and what they want to do, right, and all that. That's not, that's not really the topic. But again, we don't do anything We don't do anything in general, for someone else that we wouldn't want done for ourselves. Yeah. Something that totally goes against your grain. You're going to do it for the sake of your spouse? Depends what it is. It depends what it is. So yeah, compromises will be made on both sides. It's not a one-way street. Right? But this is a huge novelty. Huge novelty. Yeah, if I didn't have the Gemara to tell me, I'd say it's crazy. No one would expect such a thing. Yeah, you have to give more to the other person than things that you would do for yourself. In general, it's a good idea, maybe. But that's a contradiction in terms. It goes against your nature. Why would I do things that go against my nature in general? Yeah, person wants to enjoy life. The other person maybe taking things away or making things harder or okay, right? So you got to make compromises here and there to be able to be lived with. They can't be lived with. They can't be lived with. So you got to work it out other ways. But to say that someone's going to love someone else more than they love themselves, never, never. That's an impossibility because we are selfish beings. Well, how do we start out being selfish? Since the time we're born. Once the person's born, all they have is all they desire is their needs, right? Is their desires. That's why that's why the inclination is so strong, because even though the soul goes in the body, soul's a disadvantage to both offices, as we've spoken about. But the Torah mitzvahs can overcome that. Okay. But still, person has all these desires. The Torah is bent against changing your desires. Right? Going against your base desires. That's what differentiates us, says Rav Eli Lopian. That's what differentiates us from animals. Right? Because the person can say, I can do whatever I want. So we're talking about the greatness of man. Spoke about this in my BJQ podcast a while ago. Person can say, I can do whatever I want. Very good. So, says Rav Eli Lopian, animals say the same thing. They can also do what they want. Right? I haven't used this argument yet, but someone will say, what, you compared me to an animal? So what's the logic? Animals don't have free will, right? Animals are programmed DNA. If animals are programmed DNA, they can't change. So what differentiates you from an animal? Comes along, Rav Eli Lopian, one of the Torah giants, the last generation, great Bali Musar, the last generation, says Rav Eli Lopian, very simple. We can go against our base desires. Yeah, we can go against our will. Animals can't do that. Animals have no potential to do that. Even the smartest of animals can't do that. Because whatever they do is based on instinct. 100%. Right? So these desires that we have, they don't get weaker. They just get stronger. There may be different desires when a person gets older. Okay. So how in the world are you going to overcome them? There's only one way. It's Torah. That God gave the antidotes to the evil inclination, right? Which is Torah. Very good. That's the antidote. But if God doesn't help you, you don't have a chance, right? You don't have a prayer. That's how powerful the evil inclination is. But to change who I am, to change the essence of who I am, yeah, to give more of myself to someone else than I would even do for myself, that's a recipe for disaster. That's what people will say. So you say, come on, isn't that what marriage is? Marriage is give and take. Sometimes you have to give in. Sometimes they'll give in, the other side will give in to you. Whatever, within reason. Right? It's gotta be a working relationship. It's gotta be give and take. It's not all one-sided. Right? It's not all one way. Very good. Yeah, but to go against my own will, to give more of myself than I would, even if you want to say beyond the letter of the law, maybe you do some of these things. Okay. I guarantee less than half you would do, though. If you were in a situation, if you were in a specific situation, yeah, forget about another spouse or whatever, no one else involved. If you're in this situation, yeah, to go beyond the letter of the law and do something you wouldn't want to necessarily do. Now, the question is going to be, are you going to do it? or not? Right? So what's the answer? So you can tell me, it depends. It depends on what's going on, right? It depends how much pressure you're being put under, right? It depends on a number of things, right? But even saying, let's say you weigh it, some things you'll do. Why? Because you feel it's better to do it. You feel that for the greater good, let's say for the sake of family peace, yeah, you'll do it. You don't want to do it. You got 10 reasons why you don't want to. Okay. But if there's a lot of pressure, whatever, and you can rely on certain things, you'll do it. Why? Because you don't want to be ostracized, you don't want to make problems, other things. Very good. Yeah, that's what you want to do. Okay. For other things that are not like that, I would say you won't do it. For the most part, you won't do it. Why not? I don't want to be inconvenienced. I want to live my life the way I want. Why should I go beyond the letter of the law? Now, there are some people that will. There are some people, very good natured, let's say, they'll do that. 100% they'll do that. And they'll give in all the time. There are people like that. Doesn't mean they're dish rags. They're being stomped on. They just say, doesn't matter. Okay, if that's what you want, good. It depends how much goes against the grain, but let's say someone very good natured, they'll do it. Whatever, very humble, whatever. Okay. That's what you want. They'll give in. There are people like that. There are other people more stubborn, whatever. Okay. Yeah. For the most part, though, going beyond the letter of the law, it's going to depend on the situation where the person would do it. And if a person doesn't feel it's worth it, whatever the situation, they're not going to do it. Unless they feel they're going to get something out of it later. Unless they feel they'll benefit later. Why? Because it's in their interest. Yeah. And there could be a number of things why. Could be a number of things motivating that. Okay. Well, let's say you don't have any motivational interest there. There's no interest. Why would a person put themselves out and inconvenience themselves? People today, right, even in previous generations, do not want to be inconvenienced. 100% they don't want to be inconvenienced. They want things to go smooth. Nothing should bother them. Everything should be easy. What happens when they come into turmoil? Okay, they have to deal with it. Very good. But people don't want to be inconvenienced. 100%. They don't want to do that. Why would they do that? They won't like to be easy. I don't need more problems. Yeah? It's like I always say, I don't need another hole in my head. Some people say you already have too many holes in your head. Okay. But why would somebody do it? You know why someone would do it? Because they have interest. There's an external interest. When you have an external interest, you're going to gain something later, or there's going to be payoff one way or the other, you'll do it. Even if you don't like it. You know why? Because you're gaining something. You might be inconvenienced, you might not want to do it, whatever. But at the end of the day, there's a bigger game out there. There's something else that I'm gaining. Because there's something else that I'm gaining, it's worth it. If a person feels, let's say, they're not gaining anything, their pride is being trampled on. Yeah? Even let's say, in the bigger scheme of things, people, some people may acknowledge, oh, it's a good thing you did this. It's a good thing you showed up. It's a good thing this. But you're rip-roaring mad because you're not gaining. You're not really gaining from it. Right? There's no purpose in it. Right? In other words, let's say a person, got pressure to go to some family event. Yeah? Where it's not necessarily totally forbidden. You can rely on, there's certain leniencies you can rely on, whatever. Yeah? So you make an effort to come. But at the end of the day, people are going to say, of course, it's a family thing. You have to come. But they don't see the compromise that you made. They don't see the hoops you had to jump through. Right? They're going to, and even if you would say that, what are they going to tell you? You made these choices. You're different. Yeah? So that's your problem. Yeah? There's no act of kiruv here. Right? You're not drawing people closer. for sure. No one's patting on your back. What did you gain? Right? What did you gain? So a person might be reporting mad. They say, I didn't gain anything. Wasn't worth it for me. Why? Because your pride is trampled on. That's worth something. I'm saying, self-esteem got crushed. That is definitely worth something. But let's say in the bigger scheme of things, for sake of family harmony, you're not gonna get patted on the back. No one's gonna say anything. But you did what you had to do. Yeah, you did what you had to do. Now, some people would say, I'm not gonna do it. This is what it represents. I'm not going there. Yeah. If there's enough pressure, a person will probably do it, but they'll be mad. Why? Why would they be mad they have to do it? They'll be mad because there's no respect. There's no mutual respect. When the other side doesn't respect you, so this is a very hard thing to do. Yeah. But again, if it's going to stay from World War III, within the family, I would tell you it's probably better to do it. 100% it's probably better to do it. I'm not going to say it's easy to do. Then we're not going to say that. Yeah. Then we're not going to be easy to do. Yeah. But I would tell you, is it worth it? Probably in the bigger scheme of things, it's worth it, unless it's forbidden. Right? But again, a person has to think of the situation. What are the ramifications? Right? What are the repercussions? Yeah. Is it worth it in the long run? Now, some people say, no, it's not worth it. Nothing to gain. Yeah, nothing to gain. But maybe there is something to gain. But that's also part of the inclination. Because then you're starting World War III, right? And you feel justified. You 100% you feel justified. Right? And it makes sense. Right? And it makes sense why you would be justified. Yeah, it makes perfect sense. You gotta say, there's no kiruv, right? There's no doing outreach over here. No one's respecting you anymore. And you had to give in, right? You had to give in, and no one seems to care. And your ego's crushed because no respect. Now, that's a real thing. It's a huge thing. Yeah, it's not a small thing, right? But again, so what happened to, what happened to, what do you call it? So what happened to your pride over here? Let's say better. What happened to Anivas? What happened to being humble? Does humbleness come in over here? We just talked about ego, right? But it's not always about being right, right? That's not the point. It's not about being right. Yeah, it's about doing the right thing. And there are certain things, even secular people say, this is the right thing to do. Yeah? Now, again, let's say you have to compromise. And you end up compromising. Yeah? And you don't get pat on the back, no one says anything. But it's the right thing to do. So, put everyone on the spot. How's that going to make you feel? It's going to make you feel like $1 million because you did the right thing? Or are you going to feel, okay, I had to do the right thing. There was no respect. You're still mad. Right? But you did it. But essentially you did it. Okay. Yeah. So there are things that we may have to do. We don't like to do. Now, couldn't we make an excuse in this case why you don't want to do it? 100%. Could you be justified 100 different ways? Yes. You can be justified 100 different ways. Yeah. In the bigger scheme of things, what will people say? And I love hearing this. Right? I love hearing this. You got to think about what the other person thinks. Why do I have to care what the other person thinks? I feel I'm right. Person feels they're right. What does it matter? You have to look at it from their perspective. Right? So now I'm going to ask a $2 million question because I have to answer here. And the $2 million question is, they don't respect you. They don't care what you have to say. They don't care what you bring to the table. So how's the person going to do that? It's very hard. It's a two-way street. So you're doing that. You can say, but you got to think from their perspective. Okay. So my answer would be, what about my perspective? What about the Torah perspective? The answer's going to be, they don't care about the Torah perspective. Torah's perspective goes out the window. That doesn't matter. You gotta do this. And that's what they think, and that's what they believe. This is a hard thing. Anyone's ever been in this position, they know it's a hard thing. They for sure know it's a hard thing. And there are times you gotta bite your tongue, bite your lip, and you gotta do it even though for you it's not the right thing. That's what you have to do. You can't let it fester. That's the thing. Because you're not gonna get the respect. For sure not gonna get the respect. Yeah? And I would say it doesn't even matter if they do or not. What would be the right, you have to ask yourself, what would be the right thing to do in the eyes of the Torah? Forget about everything else. Forget about ego, forget about everything else. What would really be the right thing to do? Right? So in this case, probably the right thing to do is to go. That's the right thing to do. But where does the evil inclination come in here? Evil inclination, very good here. Comes on the evil inclination and says, I don't respect you. I don't care what you have to say. All they care about is, we want this, you have to be there. That's it. They don't care your perspective. They'll say, you're a right-wing fanatical nut. It's your problem. You took on all these mitzvahs. We didn't take them on. But this is what you have to do. So there are times you're allowed to do things, times not allowed to do things, right? But how does that make a person feel? Right? How does that make a person feel? I can tell you, it probably makes the person feel not too good. Why doesn't it make them feel good? Because you know, and they know, and everyone else knows, they don't give a rat's tail what you think. Not in any shape or form. So you have to jump, you have to turn the Torah into a pretzel in order to do what you need to do. But in the bigger scheme of things, in general, it's the right thing to do. Let's say it's the right thing to do. The evil inclination come over here and slaughter you. Absolutely slaughter you. It will make it impossible. Almost impossible to do. Why? Because the evil inclination will come, and say, they don't care about you. It's not about you. They're going to trample on the Torah anyway. You're not doing anybody any justice. There are no mitzvahs over here. There's no kiruv over here. So what's the point? What in the world is the point? Right? Now, if you would take a step outside of yourself and you were somebody else, what would someone else tell you? The point is, for the sake of, let's say, family peace, that's what you should do. Forget all these other things. These other things don't matter. Yeah? So now we'll make it a little more interesting. Let's say this is not the first time it's happened. Let's say it's been built up over time. Yeah? And the animosity is still there. And because the animosity is still there, it doesn't help. It gets worse. Everyone according to their level. It gets worse. Why does it get worse? Because it's all been built up. Kind of like God forbid a person doesn't brush their teeth. What builds up? Plaque. What does plaque do? Then it causes you pain, right? Gives you cavity and other things. But you have to take care of it, right? But the more it builds, what happens? You want to explode. And you may be justified in exploding. And you can rant and rave, and you can say, but you don't care my perspective. Without even screaming. You can say, you don't care about my perspective. You don't care what I have to go through. You know what you might hear? You might be shocked, probably not. They're going to say, I don't care about your perspective. This is what's important to me. And I guarantee people have been told that. Doesn't matter what you think. This is what you have to do. This is your obligation. Now, let's say in such a situation, let's say that according to the Torah, there are leniencies. There are leniencies you can rely on. Even though you wouldn't normally rely on them. Okay. Well, let's say. But there's a bigger picture here. If you would take a step outside of yourself, you'd say, you know what? In the bigger picture, this is really what you should do. And maybe somewhere down the line, maybe it'll make, a Kiddush Hashem. Maybe it'll make a sanctification of God's name. Maybe. But what does your evil inclination tell you? Yeah, you're not going to get nothing for this. Yeah, there's no Kiddush Hashem over here. don't care about that. What do they care about? They care that you have to be there. That's what they care about. That's all they care about. Your perspective, they could care less. Yeah? Now, let's say this has been built up for years. Because nothing ever happens in a vacuum. Let's say it's been built up over years. Very good. Totally been built up. Now something else happens. All things being equal, you take yourself outside of yourself. You look at it from an unbiased perspective. Are you still going to want to do it? There's no way in hell you're going to want to do it. It's going to make it much harder. And the evil inclination knows that. And the stakes now are much greater. And if you don't do something, it could be 10 times worse. 10 times worse. And the evil inclination knows that very well. That's how the inclination works. Builds it, builds it, builds it, and breaks you down. And even if you know the other side's arguments, and you know whatever, in the bigger scheme of things, deep down, the intellect knows, right? As the Orthodox says. Intellect meaning the soul knows. This is the right thing to do. This is the direction you need to go in. What's your heart telling you? Your heart is telling you, get out of my face. That's what your heart's telling you. Right? That's what it's telling you. Like, no, I'm not giving into this. They don't respect, they don't this, they don't, why should I give in? Makes it much harder. Much harder. And then someone comes along and says, well, look at it from their perspective. Then what happens? You explode. Right? Maybe justifiably, you explode. Right? Not saying a person should get angry, but think about it. Yeah, all these things have happened. You get knocked around silly, this, that, this way, the other thing. There's no respect. There's no mutual respect. Yeah? Now it's the second time it's happened, third time it's happened, whatever. Yeah? But in the bigger scheme of things, should you do it? Let's say you should. Let's say you should. You think for 1 second the evil inclination is going to let you do it? It's going to let you overcome that? Evil inclination going to make it very hard. Right? Now, in that situation, right, we'll make it very simple. In that situation, could we find at least 10 different reasons why it'd be justified not going to this event, whatever it is? You can find at least 10. At least 10. Probably 20. Probably more. Yeah? We can totally justify it. Yeah? It's going to be much harder to fight. And this is what the evil inclination is going to do. It's going to put you in turmoil. So even if you see the bigger picture, and even if you understand what you're supposed to do, yeah, then you got to go out and do it. You got to be the biggest actor in the world or actress in the world. Like there's nothing else going on, right? The problem is deep down you're rip-roaring mad. You have to do this, right? So even if a person understands and they work on themselves and this and that, is there going to be still a tinge of anger? Probably there's going to be a tinge of anger. And the reason is very simple, because what am I getting back for this? Where's the payback? Where's the benefits? Oh, I know the benefit. Benefits the bigger picture, okay. But then a person plays in their mind, look what they said here, look what they did here, this and that, and you keep getting knocked out. So when you go, you got to act like you want to be there. And if you don't act like you want to be there, then it defeats the purpose. Because then they're going to say, why are you so grumpy? Why are you so upset? Why, why this, that, and the other thing? And then, whatever. So I would say sometimes a person can play the game and do it well. Do it very well. Some people, totally honest, they can't do it. They can't pull it off. It's very hard to pull off. This is what the evil inclination does. Even if you agree, right? And this is the point. Even if you agree, this is the right thing, and you got to psych yourself up, you got to say why, and you got to go through it, you got to go through all these things in your mind, right? Of why you have to do it, right? And what the purpose of it is, and all that. You got to keep going over, right? Right? Convincing yourself, otherwise the evil inclination will destroy you. Because even if you go to this thing, right? Let's say, even if you go, can a person honestly say that they are going to play the game so well, no one's going to know the difference otherwise? If you can do that, all the power to you. But again, it's going to gnaw at a person. They're gonna be upset. They're gonna be upset they have to do it. Right? But again, if a person doesn't, if a person doesn't keep going on and on and on, about the benefits, and this and that, the evil inclination will have a field day. Absolutely have a field day. Now, the person will be justified why they shouldn't go, why they don't have to go. Right? And if you stay with that justification, what's going to happen? You're in trouble. Yeah, because you're going to be there, you're not going to be happy. And you're thinking, a person may be thinking, look at all the compromise, look at all the hoops you have to jump through to do it. You're not even getting thanked for it. They're just expecting you to be there. No one's patting you on the back. No one's giving you compliments. There's no sanctification of God's name over here. There's no outreach over here. So the evil inclination's taking a sledgehammer and saying, you buffoon, what are you doing? Why in the world would you do this? Right? You got to think of the bigger picture, but again, anyone in that situation, there are questions that will deal with them, right? In a second, but a person may feel, okay, even with all that, the justification is, I see the bigger picture. That is a justification. Yeah, but you have to believe it. And you have to keep saying it over and over again, because if you don't, what's going to happen? The evil inclination will say they don't respect you, they don't care about you, they don't care about your lifestyle, this and that, whatever. The evil inclination will beat you down. Right? So in that situation, right? Just end this with this. In that situation, would you 100% be justified? And have justifications why you're not going to do it? 100%. 100% justification. Maybe not in the eyes of other people. In the eyes of God, that's what matters. Yeah, there's 100% justification why you shouldn't do it. Right? But in the bigger scheme of things, you might have to. But if you don't look at it in those terms, then what happens is you get beat down. And then even if you do it, and you sit around there, moping and this and that, then it defeats the purpose of what you did. Right? So I would say in such a turn of events, you would have to 100% be, a great actor or actress. Right? I mean, maybe having a drink or two may help. Right? Just like ease you up a little bit, so to speak. But in general, in general, a person's not going to want to be there. And you don't feel good about being there. For a lot of reasons according to the Torah. But okay, let's say you could be there. Yeah, no one's respecting you. No one's saying what a great thing. No one's saying anything. No pat on the back, whatever. And your ego is crushed. You feel you get trampled on. You feel like there's no respect. So you say, why'd I do this? You understand the bigger picture, but understand, right? Just understand in that case what the evil inclination does. Right? And how it's going to break down a person. And even if a person's convinced beyond the shadow of a doubt, this is the right thing or whatever, and they psych themselves out, whatever. Let's say they come out flat. The evil inclination gets them. They go there, they're moping around. They defeated the purpose of what they're doing there. Now, is that an easy thing to do? I'm not saying it's an easy thing to do. Yeah, I'm just breaking down a person's in that situation, what the evil inclination going to do. Someone asked, what's the best way to apologize to someone who embarrassed you? Oh, someone you embarrassed. May have been misbehaving in a bad way. they're trying to get them to stop bad behavior. Well, they feel embarrassed, but not that what they were doing was so bad. Yeah, the problem is, let's say, the Torah says Leviticus chapter 19. I don't know if we're going to get there, but the Torah says you gotta give rebuke. Right? Now, the problem with giving rebuke is the end of the verse. What does the end of the verse say? So you don't bear the hate, you don't bear the sin. That means if you can give rebuke, without, in this case, embarrassing someone, you can't give rebuke. Right? You can't cause a sin upon yourself, give rebuke to someone else. Now, some will say that we don't know how to give rebuke today. So if we don't know how to give rebuke today, in general, you don't have to give it. Right? It's not true. Right? There are many cases you have to give rebuke anyway, even if they're not going to listen. The Gemara in Erchin says that you have to give rebuke up to the point where somebody is going to slap you. That's how far it goes. Right? But let's say you gave rebuke, it went too far, you embarrassed someone. Yeah. Now, you didn't mean to embarrass them. Right? They were doing something, let's say, in this case, they're doing something wrong. You tried to stop bad behavior, you embarrassed them. Yeah. You didn't embarrass them on purpose, right? That's worse. That is worse. Someone embarrassed someone on purpose, that's a lot worse. Yeah, that's a lot worse. But in the case where someone embarrassed somebody, I mean, you have to do what you can to gain forgiveness, because otherwise they don't forgive you. And a person's gonna embarrass them in public, they lose their portion of the world to come. Right? So you gotta do whatever it takes, try and get them to forgive them. But in either case, so you're telling me you're trying to get them to stop bad behavior, but they feel embarrassed. Okay. But the problem is, I shouldn't laugh, right? I mean, it's sad over here that they're embarrassed what you're saying against them. Okay. But they're not embarrassed for what they've done. Yeah, that's bad. They don't see anything wrong with what they've done. Right? So even in that case, if they don't feel bad about what they did, nonetheless, that doesn't matter. Right? You try to, let's say, help them, rebuke them, whatever. And in the process, you embarrass them. Okay. So it doesn't matter the fact that they don't have remorse or regret for what they've done. That's irrelevant. If they would have remorse, even better. Yeah? Let's say they don't have remorse or regret. Okay? If they don't have remorse or regret, you still embarrass them. Right? Essentially, you still embarrass them. So it doesn't matter whether they feel bad about what they did or not. The fact that a person embarrassed someone else, you can ask them for forgiveness. Otherwise, you won't get, you could forfeit your portion of the world to come. Even against an non-Jew. Doesn't matter. Right? Even against an non-Jew. All the more so if a person embarrassed a Jew. Right? I mean, it's, even if you didn't do it on purpose. Right? It doesn't really matter. Right? I mean, it does. If you did it on purpose, it's a lot worse. Yeah? There are cruel people out there. There are people that don't care if they embarrass someone. Their whole goal, let's say, is to embarrass someone. Yeah, they're in serious trouble. Those people will be in serious trouble. God, we have no problem. God will take care of them. Yeah, God will have a special place for them. But, you did it by accident. Okay. But you have to ask the person for forgiveness. Right? Now the question is, do you have to say what you did? Right? So now that's a whole discussion, because there are rabbinic authorities that will hold, we're just going to this recently, there are rabbinic authorities that will hold, if you say to someone what you did, they may be less likely to forgive you. True. But, if you say in general, if I did anything, do you forgive me? Let's say, about this point. Let's say they bring up this point. Say, listen, I didn't really mean to do it. I really feel bad about it, whatever, Or if you want, If you want, you could hit them directly. Instead of saying, well, if I did anything wrong, say, listen, I know the situation got out of hand, and it shouldn't have got out of hand, and I shouldn't have done it, and I feel really bad. You could address the situation directly, right? You could, right? It's probably better. It's probably better. But I would say, in general, it doesn't matter whether they have remorse or regret for what they did. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. Yeah, person may be shocked by that, but who cares? What difference does it make if they have any remorse or regret for what they've done? Shouldn't matter. The fact is, you embarrass someone, right? A person, A embarrassed B. Okay. B has no regret or remorse for what they've done. Yeah, that doesn't take away the fact the person got embarrassed, that B got embarrassed. B still got embarrassed. Shouldn't they have remorse and regret for what they've done? Absolutely. 100%. They should feel bad. Okay? 100% they should feel bad. Now the question is going to be how you get atonement for that. If you have to try and get them, you have to try and appease them, to the best of your ability. Now, if you go there, the first time they don't accept it, you go there with a few people, second time they don't accept it, third time they don't accept it, you go with the whole entourage, then that's it. You don't have to worry about it. Your portion of the world to come is good. Right? And what's the reason? Because they didn't accept your forgiveness. But again, so, there's a story, I told the story before. Someone taught in America years ago, lives in Israel. He was talking to a former student, and he asked how, ex-student was, and he said, well, he's not doing so well. I said, why? He said, he pretty much, went off. So he asked him, like, what happened? He said, well, tell you the truth, back in school, whatever, like, you embarrassed him. You embarrassed him in front of everyone. And from that point, he started going, slowly but surely, he stopped keeping Torah mitzvahs, doesn't keep anything now. It's really just number. Can I speak to him? And he spoke to him, and he said, listen, I'm very sorry. Is this really true? He says, yeah, whatever. And so the person tells him, he says, well, what can I do, to make it up to you? I really feel so bad. I might have had a bad day. I don't know, whatever. But like, what can I do to make it up to you? So the person says, the only way you can make it up to me is you have to get the whole class back together. Back in back in the school, back in the same classroom, and you have to ask me for forgiveness in public. He said, what, are you kidding me? He said, people all over the world. What do you think, I'm made of money? He goes, that's the only way I'm going to accept you. I'll grant you forgiveness. So this person went to greatest halachic decider, generation, Rabbi Elishiv, blessed memory, Rabbi Elishiv, and he asked him what to do. He said, what am I supposed to do? I don't have money for that. So Rabbi Elishiv screamed at him. He said, you want your portion of the world to come? You want it back? If that's the way you have to do it, that's the way you have to do it. He said, I don't have money for it. He said, find money, borrow money, whatever. This is what you have to do. If he's willing to grant you your portion of the world to come, are you stupid? Essentially, he told him, you gotta be off, gotta pick it in. Do it. You got an obligation to do it. So he got the money, however he got the money. He went to America, get everybody together, all the former students, called them up. It took him a while, get a hold of everybody. Went back to the school, brought everybody together, went in front of the class, and publicly apologized. That's what he did. And the person forgave him. The person forgave him. Right? Now you're going to say, well, it's a nice story. I don't know where the guy got the money from. He's still paying it off. I have no idea. Yeah, I have no idea. That part of the story ends. Yeah, that's how far it goes. The person had to pay, probably a small fortune, back in the day to do this. Or Rabbi Elishiv told him very clearly, he's granting you a portion of the world to come. He's giving it to you back. He's giving it to you on a platter. And you're questioning how I'm going to do it? Do it! He's like, don't be an idiot, do it! But it's not a small thing. Portion of the world, person, embarrass someone, let's say, getting that portion of the world to come, to get it back, that's huge. Do whatever you can to try and get it back. I'm not gonna say it's gonna be easy, right? But in general, it's like you murdered someone. Yeah. Now, in this case with this Rebbe, yeah, that whatever, with this teacher, embarrassing him in public caused this student basically to go off. That's what the catalyst was. Now again, that student, that person later in life, God's gonna judge them. He's gonna take into account what happened and whatever. Okay. But he still has to take responsibility for his actions. A lot of things happen to a person. The evil inclination come in many different ways, trying, and say, see what this person did, whatever. Okay, maybe the person needs therapy, other things, very good. But isn't there a level of responsibility even so? So it depends. Right? I'm not playing God, I don't play him on TV either. Right? Question how God's gonna look at it. Yeah. God can say, you're right, this happened, but I expected you to overcome it. I expected this, I expected that. And whatever. Is God going to have that claim against people in the Holocaust? No. Can't imagine. Right? There are people that survived the Holocaust, that their emunah bitachon, their faith and belief in God was intact. And if someone came out of the Holocaust and they were broken and they didn't keep Torah mitzvahs after that, can't judge them. Can never judge them. How's God going to judge them? Good question. God, whatever. God will have to deal with them. We can't judge them. If someone saw their family killed in front of them and all the other atrocities they saw, right? We can't judge them. 100% we can't judge them. I would say at the same time, however God's going to look at it. He'll judge it however he sees it. Okay? Right? Not, it's not for us to judge. And someone has a mental breakdown because of this. And then other things. That can start the process of someone going up. How's God going to judge that person? Good question. Very, very good question. Let's say have mental illness, other things, but it's part of life. Let's say the person has, that's a pretty big trauma, right? I know a kid, similar thing. As an adult now, probably in his 30s now, but that's how it started. The downward process. The downward process started when he got embarrassed as a 15-year-old by the head of the issue. That's where it started. Yeah? Now, how's the person going to get judged later? Can't answer. But, it caused a lot of bad feelings. Person, went off the rails at some point, because of it. Again, I'm not here to judge. Yeah? Could this have a major effect on the person? Sure. What does it do? It destroys self-esteem. Right? It's a great rabbi once told me, I mentioned this many times. A great rabbi once told me many years ago, many years ago. He said, a blessed memory. He told me, he's a major educator, major rabbinic authority, and he told me that the single biggest problem today, certainly with kids and young adults, is lack of self-esteem. Yeah, he told me this 20 years ago, 25 years ago even. Yeah, that was the single biggest problem today, right? And back in the day. Today, maybe we say the same thing, but probably the single biggest problem today among Orthodox youth is technology. But back in the day, it's still self-esteem. I still think a lot of kids don't have a lot of self-esteem, but still. So he told me, we got to build these kids up. Tell them how great they are, what their potential is. It's 80-20, 80% of the time you're going to say positive things, or 90% of the time say positive things against 10% or 20% negative things, right? Because more negative things, you destroy them, right? You totally destroy them, right? So in general, that's what he said. So I asked him, I said, but if you do that and you build them up, you think that God's gift to the world. I'm thinking, how professional athletes are, when they start out younger. They're all prepped up thinking that God's gift to the world. They have egos, a lot of them. Not all of them, but a lot of them, plenty of them have egos, so to speak. And it does, and it gets worse when they're, when they get, let's say, the professional level and whatever, and they're always, people telling them how great they are at different things or whatever. So their egos don't go away. get worse. Get worse in general. Then they think, they have power, they have money, they can do whatever they want. Fame, right? They can do all kinds of things. Okay. Yeah. So I told him, but there's going to be a problem. You're going to build them up. They're going to have bigger egos. Yeah. So I said, don't worry. I can work with that also. I said, I know how to, I know how to deal with that also. But he said that wasn't the problem. It's a different problem. Right? But that's not the problem. So back in the day, 20 years ago, 25 years ago, yeah, it was a problem of lack of self-esteem. So if we're living in a, as a friend of mine would say, a cream puff generation, living in a very weak generation, well, guess what? Any little thing, I think 13, 14, 15-year-old kid, like you can totally destroy them. Yeah, because they're very fragile. It doesn't mean they don't have to be disciplined. Doesn't mean sometimes you might have to say something that, jars them a little bit, maybe. Within reason. But today's a very weak generation, right? I don't think too many people, will disagree. Very fragile people are today. Okay, but you have to discipline them. You have to know, like, certain things they can't do, whatever. But, there's always the factor where, a child may say, oh, you're not going to let me do this. I'm going to do what I want. I'm going to eat non-kosher. Okay, it's your choice, right? Like a friend of mine would say, teenagers are like they're their own creation. Yeah, yeah. You got to think of like, the Rock of Gibraltar. You got to take whatever comes. But someone can say that that's their choice. Everyone makes a choice, right? As the old adage goes, you make the bed you lie in. You got to take responsibility, right? Now, parents have great responsibility. So, if a kid, God forbid, goes sour, still part of the parent's responsibility. Let's say you did everything you could, whatever, kid gets, wrong crowd. Okay, he's trying to change it, trying to do other things. But at some level, the parents are responsible. Some level. Yeah, for better or for worse. So it's a huge responsibility. Huge. Huge responsibility for parents today. But children need to be disciplined. You have to know there's a right and wrong. You have to know how to discipline. Right? You can't punish. You can't punish if the punishment doesn't fit the crime. You have to tell them why they're being punished. You can't just punish. You can't punish when you're angry. I mean, it's hard today. It's very, very, very hard. You have some parents, don't want to punish. And the reason they don't want to punish is because they're afraid of the repercussions. They're afraid what the kid's going to do. And the kid could come along and say, "You think I think I'm going to learn tomorrow? You think I'm going to school tomorrow? You think I keep Torah mitzvahs?" I mean, yeah, they could say that. They can be defiant for a certain amount of time. But again, the wisest of all men, says King Solomon in Proverbs, right? If you spare the rod, just consider cruel. Now we're not talking about corporal punishment, right? You hit a kid today, kid will call the police on you. So, right, hitting doesn't work. Sometimes, you have to kind of like fake it a little bit. If you're going to punish, the Rambam says, you got to show anger, you got to fake it as much as possible. You don't want it to affect you. But you have to punish and show that the punishment fits the crime. That's what you have to do. And the kid has to get what they did wrong. But if you don't punish, says King Solomon himself, if you don't punish, that's cruel. Right? That's going to be cruel. Why is it cruel? Because kids need discipline. They may say, we don't need discipline, I don't want discipline. I'm good the way I am. Okay, but that's not true. Right? Totally not true. They need discipline. Right? They need sometimes to be put in their place. Can't just do what they want. Not allowed to just do whatever you want. And if you have a child that feels they can do whatever they want, they're going to be like very little or no repercussions, not going to be good for them either. Yeah, because they're going to do things that let's say are beyond their age, that they're not ready for. Let's say it affects them in other ways. A person has a child, where you're trying to be more insular, and obviously if you say, well, whatever you do, don't do this or don't do that, what's the first thing they're going to want to do? They want to try it. They want to see it, whatever it is. So they're kids like that, right? So they say, curiosity killed the cat. So it was, yeah, I tried this when I was younger, I tried that when I was younger. They're not better people for it. And they'll admit themselves they weren't ready for it. They weren't, and it affected them in a negative way. So why'd they do it? Right? So why'd they do it in general? Because they want to try it. Inclination told them to try it. You're going to say, well, if you're saying it's so forbidden, there must be something to it. Right? There must be something to it. Very good. Yeah, when you're ready to handle it. When you're old enough. When you're not old enough, what happens? You think you're ready for it, or even if you're not ready for it, what does it tell you? Do it. Yeah, why did it tell me not to do it? And then you did it. What happens? Affection negatively. And sometimes it can spiral out of control. And the more it spirals out of control, what happens? What happens? Hard to fix. Right? Bad habits, hard to fix. Right? Very good for Yom Kippur. Very, very hard to fix. Even try and fix a little bit is hard. Because we do things by rote. We do things habitually. To work on things, we don't do it in a jolt way. It takes someone, let's say, for instance, someone addicted to heroin, yeah? You get them off heroin, you got to give them certain drugs because the body craves it. So it's going to be helpful for them for a certain amount of time to the body gets stabilized. But at the end of the day, that's going to kill you. So essentially, if that potential is going to kill you, you got to go to another extreme to try and stop it. Now, some things very addictive. It's hard to stop. Very hard to stop. There are things that are addictive, enjoyable, right? They're totally enjoyable, but at the same time, not good for the soul. Forget about the body. Definitely not good for the soul. But people say it, but I've done this, I've done that, and I've seen things never should have seen. Blah blah blah. I see images. Blah blah blah. Okay. Today's a new day. God's never going to accept me. Not true. You got to properly repent, but you got to figure out a way how to not do this. And there are people that, are specialists in addiction, or drug addiction, or internet addiction, or other addiction. There are people that are experts in this. Yeah. Is it easy to stop? Of course not. Especially if it's enjoyable. Especially if you have access to it. Whatever it may be. But the problem is constantly doing it. Yeah, the more you do it, it becomes second nature. Once it becomes second nature, right? Once it becomes second nature, it's not easy to fix. Yeah, it's now part of your psyche. Now it's part of your DNA. So now that it's part of your DNA, what do you do? What do you do? Right? Let's say in this case you did to yourself, even worse. Yeah. It's not inherent in who you are, but it's who you are now. You made it part of your DNA. So aren't you going to say, well, God can't punish me, it's not part of my DNA, but you did it to yourself. Forget you were born that way. It's a whole another issue. But you did it to yourself. Okay. If I did it to myself, right? The person did it to themselves. They got no one to blame but themselves. However it happened, doesn't matter. Yeah. Now it's part of your psyche. Once it's part of your psyche, once it's part of your DNA, is it easy to stop? Doesn't make it easy to stop. It's part of who you are. It's part of your essence. So obviously, the more you do it, the harder it is to stop, says Rabbeinu Yonah. First time person did something forbidden, it's going to be shocked, how could I have done it, this, that. Second time, same thing. Third, fourth, fifth time, probably same thing. But then you get to a point where, okay, I'm holding better than most of the world. Really, it's not so bad. Right? It's not the worst thing in the world. There are other things that are worse. Okay, very good. Now you're justifying it. Now you're going to say why it's an enhancement to my life. Why it's good for me. Why it's good for the soul in general. Yeah, that's how it starts. That's exactly how it starts. Now, when you're doing things, on a regular basis, you tell me, Especially if it's addictive things and they're, within your body and it's very hard to stop. Very good. Yeah. You're gonna say, but it's impossible to stop. All right. It's hard. I agree. I wouldn't say impossible, but the problem is whatever it is, you know, whatever the bad trait is, the more you do it, the more you feed it, the worse it is. Right? So sometimes, yeah, you got to stop it cold turkey. Sometimes, and it's not that easy. You can't just turn it off. But if we see it as something that's being poisoned, you wouldn't go near it. Right? Anyone, God forbid, has cancer, majority of the time, what do? They burn it out. That's what they do. Yeah, these bad character traits, you got to burn it out. Right? Somehow you have to get out of the habit. Whatever it is that makes the person feel to do this, okay, why am I doing it? What's the purpose of my doing it? And then try and fix it. Now, even if you know the purpose and all that, trying to fix it, yeah, might not be so easy. Right? Person may need, outside help to do that. Right? There are things out there not easily fixable. Torah doesn't make it easily fixable. Yeah. Yeah. If a person has a proper perspective, yeah, they see the bigger picture. They're steeped in Jewish philosophy. They're learning, Musar and duties of the heart. They're learning this all the time, and they're working and whatever. Okay, can that will it if a person has a chemical imbalance? Wish it could. No magic formula, right? It can take away some of it, I think, for sure. Maybe, a chunk of it. Look, if a person has a chemical imbalance, that's not going to help, right? It'll help in some ways, but it's not going to help totally. Right? Let's say, if a person doesn't have chemical balance. Yeah, it could be tied to, some mental health issues and you got to deal with it. A person's deal with it with a mental health professional. Otherwise you won't get over it. And Torah's not enough. For these things, Torah's not enough. Again, for many things I wish it was. I wish it was. You have the proper perspective, whatever. You're working on it, you're striving on it, you have other help with it, very good, right? But, to take it away 100%, again, I wish it would be true. Wish 100% it would be true, right? And even if it wasn't a mental health issue and it wasn't, let's say, chemical imbalance, even if it wasn't either of that, the evil inclination will drive you mad over here. Will totally drive you mad. If a person, let's say, and there are a lot of people like this today. Many people like this. Let's say, they have self-esteem issues. Yeah. You know, if they go back, however long and what people said and what people did, yeah, made them feel like a piece of dirt. Okay. Yeah. So that sting probably never goes away. Probably never goes away. Right? Now, the more I understand Torah, right? Let's say, the more I understand. So the more I see these people like, they're just bumbling idiots and they don't know anything or whatever. And they're like, they're mentally challenged and they have a 25 IQ. So now I can say, well, whatever they said doesn't really matter. But, people will say, but, I was bullied, this happened, the other thing happened. And, at the end of the day, the pain doesn't go away. If a person will play a scenario back, again, I'm not a psychologist, so you can take this with a grain of salt. But if a person played, plays this back in their mind, what the person said, what they did. But now they're coming to it with a totally different perspective. They're coming with it with the Torah perspective. I would think in some ways, if you look at it that way, right? Even these people are cruel, they're evil, it doesn't really matter. Right? It doesn't really matter who they are. Yeah. At the end of the day, they said something, if you did something bad, if you did something wrong, okay. Right? Well, there are times the punishment won't fit the crime. But let's say. So you say, but it happened over and over and over and over again. Okay. I get it. I get that would be the case and a person have very low self-esteem. Right? But at the end of the day, if you play it back in your mind and you realize like this other person has some sort of mental health, issue, it's still gonna sting. The sting 100% won't go away. Yeah? It probably won't go away. But if I understand, if I understand the person wasn't well, Yeah. The person wasn't well mentally. Yeah. Then why should I necessarily feel that pain? So you can say it's something deep rooted and whatever. Imagine, I'll give an example. Imagine if somebody said, someone said to a person when when they were younger, and nobody wants to, they say, come on, you're a kid, you're a teenager, and they put you down. Let's say person said something, not, they disagreed. But let's say, I don't know, somebody disagreed with an adult, disagreed with it. They put you down, you know, and then they tell you, not they just to put you down, telling you you're wrong or whatever. Yeah, what do they tell you? They tell you what, what you think doesn't really matter. Or even better, we don't care what you think. Imagine if an adult, a peer, or whoever says, like, who cares what you say? Now, I'm not saying you said something stupid. Yeah, maybe you said something okay. Maybe not everyone's going to agree with it. Okay, yeah, but let's say it was something that's not so off the rails. Let's say, I was reading an article about somebody, teenager, became religious and living in a house of people that weren't religious, right? Someone Jewish. So, they went through a very hard time, very very hard time. How are they going to keep Passover by themselves? How are they going to have their own Passover Seder? Yeah, it's hard. But imagine the family like put them down. And they said, you're doing all these crazy things, and we think you're crazy. Maybe we're going to take your psychologist, maybe this, but they were steadfast, believing, they had good influences. They had good people helping them. Okay. You know, but if they said, like, you're not putting this practice on us, and, it's a phase, and, you get over it, whatever. And, we don't really care what you think or what you do. Teenage kid. What do you think that's going to do to them? Now, if they have good support, and this person had very good support, so what would somebody who's helping them, whatever, there was a rabbi helping them, what would they say to them? What would they say if a parent said that? Or a sibling said that? Now, this person can take it to heart, and they could say, but I'm really doing the right thing in God's eye. I really want to learn, and, whatever. Yeah, but that stings. That totally stings. You know, they're telling you you're in a cult. You're being brainwashed. Don't listen to these people. Whatever. And they start saying things against Torah, against God, whatever. Yeah, but so you tell me the things against Torah and God, they can get around because people don't know anything, whatever. Okay. So they try to have a discussion, they don't want to listen. Okay. But then they say something below the belt. Then they say, no matter what you say, no matter what you do, bring this rabbi, that rabbi, it doesn't really matter. We don't give one rat's tail what you think. What would that do to a person? Yeah, it's people they love, people they care about. And they just shot them down. They just totally shot them down. Yeah. So let's say, it's a sibling, it's a parent, it's a peer, right? Right? Let's say it's a peer, who knows? Yeah, that says such a thing. Now, is that person going to be devastated? Very well could be devastated. And let's say they become religious and, they stay religious or whatever. But they stayed strong, right? Let's say they stayed strong. Now, they look back on this 10 years later. Yeah, they're married. Let's say, they have a family. What this person does, whatever, right? They've gone through this, right? One of the things they said, by the way, they had a lot of little kids, right? And they never wanted to complain of how hard it was. Why? Because what would the parents say? You had so many kids, your fault. Who told you to have so many kids? Who told you to have them so close together? You could have had two. You could have had three. You decided to have eight. You make the bed, you're right. It's your fault. Anyone want to hear that? Nobody wants to hear that, right? Nobody wants to hear that. So don't you think that could have a negative effect? So this person said that's why the conversation never came up. because they know what they were going to say. And they didn't want to have to deal with that confrontation. Okay. Now, wouldn't you say if the parent said it, for sure, that'd be painful? Sure. Right? But even if the parent told this kid, right? I mean, adult, obviously, no, many kids, right? They said when they were 15, yeah, they told them, we don't care what you have to say, we don't care what you think. What if they told them when they were 20? Even when they were married, yeah? And they had kids, a lot easier. Now you have support. But let's say, that's a very hard thing to hear from someone you care about. What you say doesn't matter. What you think doesn't matter. It's painful. It's very painful, right? Now, why are they saying it? Because they realize maybe the person's right, maybe we're wrong, but they don't want to be affected by it. They're going to say, you're in a cult, you're doing this, doing that. Okay. Now, 20 years later, right? Let's say the relationship is fine. Yeah. But they're playing this over in their mind. That a parent, a sibling, a peer, whoever it was, told them what they say doesn't matter. Right? Now, if they had good guidance, what are they going to tell them? When they were much younger, don't worry about it, move on. They didn't mean it in that way, whatever, you move on because, the advice they'll be given or may be given is people don't know anything anyway, they're just afraid. Yeah? It still stings though, right? Right? It still stings to a point. But imagine if from the very beginning, you understood this. Is that going to affect you now, step by step later? It won't, right? It won't and it shouldn't. Why not? Because you have your head screwed on straight. And you understand what's true and what's not true. Yeah? You understand what's true and not true. So you have good people behind you. But you're still going to tell me, someone will say, but if I heard that as an adult, it would sting. Okay. Yeah. As a child, all the more so. Okay. But again, you now have a perspective, right? Let's say someone said it. Someone says it to you tomorrow. Someone says it to you today. You're in a cult, you're right-wing fanatical nut. It's someone you care about. Not someone just off the street. Someone off the street you care less. Tell them I hope you get hit by a bus tomorrow. Yeah, who cares? Yeah, who cares what someone else says? But it's said by a loved one. Someone you care about. Right? Now, if I'm steeped in Torah and mitzvahs, and I understand, where the person's coming from, they're going to say, oh, you're in a cult, you're in this, we want you to be more like us, blah, blah, blah. But they're making you feel bad. Peer pressure. They are making you feel bad. Yeah, what's the response? What should a person's response be? Yeah, well, a person will be defensive. A person will say, can say, like, what do you mean, what I have to say doesn't matter. Who cares what you say? Is that what someone would answer? Oh, and you think you got God's gift to the world, you have what to say? Who cares what you have to say? Right? Goes both ways. But doesn't want to have that, have that whole discussion. But how does that make a person feel? So you tell me it doesn't make you feel good. Right? Doesn't matter how old you are. It doesn't make you feel good. It could be in your 20s, it could be in your 30s, doesn't matter. Right? Doesn't matter. Even if you blow it off, even if a person's married and everything's good and your spouse has your back or whatever, it's like, it stinks. 100% it stinks. Yeah, no matter what you say, they're gonna say you're in a cult, you're this, you're that. Okay. But now I have a different perspective. The perspective is these people have 25 IQ. That's a perspective. I am not going to take seriously, even if it stings, I am not going to take seriously what someone with a 25 IQ is going to say. I'm not going to lose sleep over it. I'll use it for this. Be good therapy. I'll use it for this. So people understand how stupid people are. Yeah? So based on that, even with all the pressure, yeah, and what people are going to say, so now you have a totally different perspective looking at it. The totally different perspective is these people are nuts. These people are mentally challenged. Yeah? If someone's mentally challenged, are you going to care what they say or they do? No. Yeah, they could push you, they could slobber over you, they could do other things. Okay. But in the bigger scheme of things, you gonna care? Person themselves are mentally challenged. Yeah, so even what happened today, tomorrow, the next day. Well, what's the first thing you're gonna say? Who are you? Who are you to tell me anything? About God, about religion, you think you really know, you never learned anything. I mean, you go down that path if you want. You're going to be on the defensive. You will be on the defensive because you've been offended. You have a right to be offended here. Because someone outright is telling you, I don't give a rat's tail what you think. Your life is meaningless to me. Yeah? Doesn't matter what you say or what you think or any of your people or people you want to be like or whatever. Now, you're going to tell me that's painful. Yes. 100%. It's painful. But someone who's mentally challenged, we're going to answer them, right? A lot of people would probably answer them. It's like, who are you? Like, oh, screw you. Who are you? Like, who do you think you are? You have a right to tell me what I know, what I don't know, this and that. Yeah, did you ever learn anything? You ever study any Torah? You ever anything? No, I just think it's crazy. Okay, so what? So what? You're gonna break me down? You're gonna tell me, my life isn't worthwhile? Yeah. I'll let God tell me that. I'll worry about that in the next world and what I've done. I got to be better in this world. I got to do what I need to do, and that's the best thing for me. Well, someone's gonna come along and say, "We don't give a rat's tail what you think," right? Think about what you would answer to that. I just gave you a whole perspective. You're just gonna go think because you're not gonna care what they think. It doesn't matter what they think. You're gonna say, "Wow, I don't care what they think. They don't care what I think." Okay, but when you hear it and someone says that to you, it could be a child, it could be, it could be a parent, God forbid, it could be peers, it could be anybody, and you can say that's painful. Good. But if I have a perspective saying these people know nothing about my life or anything else, what am I going to care what they say? So now, based on that, if that would happen years ago, you didn't have that wisdom. You didn't have that wisdom. Now, go back and play what someone said. Yeah? Go play what they said. So now you're armed with different information. So even though you're going to tell me years ago, and it was very strong, you say these people are retarded, right? Can't say that, but they're mentally challenged. Is that going to have the same effect on a person? Now you tell me damages, okay. But if I play back that scenario, some of the sting goes out. Some of the sting should go out. Again, you can take what I say with a grain of salt. I'm not a psychologist, but if I would play it back in my mind, and what someone said, which is never a good idea, because just rehash the same negative things, but okay, right? And someone said something, I'm not going to get that excited by it. It was a sleepover. Yeah. Even if it stung back then, today, I use it for this. Totally use it for this. Because what they say doesn't matter. Right? Shouldn't have any effect. Even if it stung back then. What are you saying? Now I have a lot more knowledge. Now I have a lot more understanding. So when I have a lot more knowledge, a lot more understanding, all the more so the person will say it today. Just laugh. Right? You gotta be careful because you don't want to embarrass someone either. But people say stupid things. They do stupid things. Right? And they don't care. And people don't care. Yeah. And that is, and that's the problem. Yeah. But at the end of the day, is it going to affect me spiritually? Is it going to affect me in other ways? Right? It's going to affect my mental health. Right? Now it shouldn't. Now again, you can tell me this is ego, and the person thinks they're right. Yeah, we do believe we're right. And we should believe we're right. But I would say, you have to see it from the Torah perspective. See it from the Torah perspective. Whatever happens, you got to see it's from God. Obviously, God's challenging you and using that person as a stick, right? But at the end of the day, why do I care what other people think? Even if they're going to say it to me, we can say it back. Like, who cares what they think? I'm going to take seriously what an actor says about Judaism when he can't read the alphabet. I mean, I think it's kind of funny. People make, statements about, their Jewish roots and what they think and blah, blah. Who cares what they think? I had to get a lot of money, a lot of power, blah, blah, blah. Okay. Yeah. I don't know anything. Right? The only problem is, it's hard to do this because let's say the damage is done. A person got hurt. Right? Maybe they got hurt many, many times. Maybe there were different things said many times in different ways. Yeah. Imagine if someone, I'll just throw this out there, I'll end with this. Imagine if someone said, let's say you had a sibling. Yeah, you had a sibling, a peer, or somebody, I don't know, and they tell you, had I been more, around in your life, had I been more around, you never would have turned out this way. If someone said that. Isn't that huge ego? Like, I could have had much more influence, you would have been normal. I don't know about that. Yeah. Well, let's say somebody said that. Let's say somebody said that. Wouldn't that be very hurtful to the other person? Say basically you're in a cult, whatever. But I would have had so much more influence, I could have done something. I could have done something to change. You wouldn't have become who you became. That's just somebody you cared about said that. Also a hard statement. Right? So let's say it stung when they said it, I don't know, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, whatever. Let's say it really stung. Like someone says, not only we don't care what you think, but if I had been around, you wouldn't have turned out the way you did. Let's say. That's painful. But if you were this person being narcissist or having some other, mental health issue, even though it stung back then, 10 years later, 20 years later, you have a totally different perspective. You don't care what they said. You can say, but deep down, isn't it painful? Again, perspective. If somebody mentally challenged would have said that, would laugh at their face. You wouldn't do that. Yeah, not so nice, per se. But you see someone, someone says, "Oh, who cares what you think?" And I could have had someone so much more info. You laugh at them. You would laugh at them. There's nothing to talk about. But why does this affect us so much? Because we care about the person. That's why it affects. That's the negative effect. We look at it 10 years later. You say, wow, person had a big ego. Person thought this, that, and the other thing. But you know what? I'm going in the right direction. God's helped me in so many different ways. Like, you don't need this person, right? You don't need them. Even their family member. You don't need them. Yeah, and then you're going to laugh at them. You're going to laugh at it and say, come on, person really said it. Yeah, it's big ego, whatever. But you have a totally different perspective. Now, again, some people will claim once the damage is done, it's done. Okay? I'm not here to argue. So, person may, need some sort of mental health professional to, to deal with that. But at the end of the day, if I had this mentality, no matter what anyone said, right, in general, should take away a lot of this. A lot of this, right? Even, again, if someone would say it tomorrow or today, they say, you know what? Your perspective is so backwards. Your perspective, nobody really cares about. You're a minority in the world, blah, blah, blah. Like you're burning up. You're burning up because this is what you're fighting for. This is what your life is. You're burning up. Yeah? And all you want to do is either slug the person or answer them straight away. Now, you might have to answer them straight away. Yeah? But in the bigger scheme of things, this person's a dimwit. This person's got a 25 IQ. They're influenced by the media. They try to have the conversation. What about the media? What it does? The right perspective. They still make fun. And they still say things. Yeah? I'm going to worry about it. I'm going to take it to heart. A lot of people say, yeah, it's, if you're more sensitive, yeah. It's a lot more painful. You take more things to heart. Okay. But if I have my head screwed on straight, even if they say something like that, right? Right? Even if someone would say it, I spoke about this, I don't know, last week, a few weeks ago. Someone says, well, you need to be nice. Well, doesn't the other person need to be nice? You could easily answer that. Well, I'm not saying you go out of your way to be mean, but if other people, they should also be nice. They also shouldn't put you down. Also shouldn't drag you in the mud, this and that. Yeah. Why is it only the onus on me? Why is why is it, oh, you have to do this. You have to be the bigger person, right? Anyone ever hear that? Everyone says that. This person will never change. You got to be the bigger person, right? Spoke about that. This is the same thing. It's the same idea. It's the same idea. Now, you want to be the bigger person. You want to have a relationship. Good. If you don't want to, is it your fault? You're going to gain anything from it? I don't know. Maybe for the sake of family peace, maybe. But in general, is it worthwhile? You have to decide, right? But we have the ability. The point is, right? You have the ability to make the decision how you're going to react and what you're going to do. And even if it's painful, even if it's painful. But I would say this mentality should take away a lot of it, even things in the past. Now, again, I'm not a psychologist, so take this with a grain of salt. But even with some things in the past, you have a totally different perspective. So after the fact, what does it do? Makes you realize these people are incompetent. They're insane. They did things they shouldn't have done. Okay. Yeah. So they're not in the right mind. Right? So even though it might affect you negatively before, even though now you're getting it off your chest and now you see a totally different perspective. So in hindsight, you can say, so what? You can say, so what? Doesn't matter. Right? But again, we are very complex beings. So it's not so simple. Right? Because there can be deep-rooted pain there. Okay. Right? Right? So, to get out of some of it, I'm not going to say all of it. I would love to say all of it. But to get out of some of it, you're not even taking it seriously. Even again, if it's done in the past, all the more so right now. If someone's going to say that or say any of these things. So you tell me it's cruel if they say, you're right. It's not nice. It doesn't make you feel good, especially with other people around. Doesn't mean you have a right to defend yourself. You have a right to defend yourself. But again, where's it coming from? It's coming from a person with a pea brain. Yeah, they don't know nothing from nothing. Yeah, when it comes to spiritual things. So why would I take what they say seriously? Because you're going to say what they said is mean. Okay. You can have a 7-year-old say something mean. Okay, they have to be answered. They have to be put in their place. Yeah, they have to be disciplined. So you say someone 28 who says it has to be disciplined. And you got to say something. Okay. You might have to. I'm not saying no. But realize where it comes from. Yeah, and sometimes having this discussion is just a waste of time anyway. Yeah. Someone asked, is it worth to tell them if you were upset or better to let it go and move on? Depends. It depends what you think you're going to get out of it. If they don't think they did anything wrong, you're not going to convince them. They're not going to see it from your perspective. And if they do, maybe they'll say, you shouldn't take it so seriously, you're too sensitive. Maybe you are too sensitive. So what? Doesn't give them a right to say it. Right? You can tell them. But the question is, what do you hope to gain by it? Do you hope they're going to change? Do you hope, they're going to apologize? Maybe they will, maybe they won't. Again, if someone, it's even better, right? Even better. Someone says, it's embarrassing to be seen with you in public, the way you dress, right? As an Orthodox Jew, let's say. They don't apologize for that. Could you confront them? You could. Should you? Depends. Depends what you think you're going to get out of it. And let's say they're not taking it back. They meant what they said. Now, isn't that hard to take? Someone tells you in person, in public, it's embarrassed to be seen with you in public. Isn't that embarrassing? Yeah. And let's say the person has no regret, no remorse whatsoever. And they'll never apologize. What's the point of calling in the morning? They're going to say, you're right, I said it. Now, they could back off and say, well, I didn't mean it that way. Like, you know what I meant. Or they might get out of it and say, they'll say, I didn't mean it. Maybe they'll say, I didn't mean it. Maybe they'll say, you're oversensitive. But let's say neither of this. Let's say they don't admit they did anything wrong. They don't admit anything if they did anything wrong, right? Now, let's say it's a parent, or let's say it's a sibling, or even a child. Yeah? Now, absolutely you could confront them. You could. Now, what's the purpose of confronting them? You have to, I can't answer that question, right? You have to answer that question. What's the purpose of confronting them? If you think they're going to get an apology out of them, you think they're going to apologize, you want an apology, you can ask them for an apology. What if they come back and they say, I'm not apologizing, I didn't do anything wrong? They don't say they did anything wrong. You say, you don't think this is insensitive? You don't think, this shouldn't be said and how it should be said. And what do you do that? Then you get angry. Yeah. So you have to see, is it worth it? What's your end goal? What's your end goal? I can tell you if somebody said, in this case, embarrassed to be seen with you in public, they're not going to take it back. They're not going to take it back. So you're going to, you confront them and say, well, that was mean. What could they do? They could say more mean things. They don't care. There's no remorse, no regret. So is it worth it? In that case, it's not worth it. I would say it's not worth it. Right? It's not a question of getting the person's respect. Right? Maybe you're not going to get the respect. Yeah. But at the end of the day, you want them to be amends. You want them to realize they did something wrong. Okay. So you say, listen, this is wrong. This is out of place. You shouldn't have said it, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. Yeah. And if they do, great. If not, if the end goal is ask them to stop saying such things, okay. You can try. 100% you can try. They stop saying such things. Good. It may just take them on to say more things. But yeah, you can't. If that's your end goal, to get them to be more sensitive, let's say, you can do that. If you think that's, again, there are certain things, right? There are certain things I would say that, yeah, you have an obligation to say something. Like, this is out of line. It's out of line. Yeah. Again, it depends what it is. But if it's out of line, yeah, absolutely. Even if nothing good's going to come out of it, except for the fact they know, they have to know they did something wrong. Yeah. So if you want to do that, should. Right? People should be held accountable. They don't want to be. They certainly don't want to be. Right? See where it goes. 100%. To make sure, things don't happen in the future. But I can tell you in certain situations, if I would have done that, they're going to change. They're not going to change. So they're not going to change. Is there any point? I wouldn't say there's any point. Yeah. You can, again, I'm not saying you can't make them aware that they're insensitive. You can make them aware. Probably should make them aware. But then, at the end of the day, is that going to change anything? I don't know. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. If you think it'll change something and you feel, yeah, so you should do it. Yeah. Any other questions? I harp on this a lot because this thing comes up a lot. Right? Our perspective matters because it affects us who we are. Psychologically it affects us. So therefore, you're going to be super strong and you have to understand where things come from, why people are saying it. Some people are saying things just to say things. Some people don't care what they say. Yeah. Someone can say, who cares what you think? They don't care. That's the bottom line. They don't care. How are you going to change somebody to care when they don't care? That's deep in a person's personality. That's hard to change. And if the other person doesn't want to change, you're not doing anything. You're absolutely doing nothing. You make it worse in a certain way. Because you know they're not going to change. You know they don't have the perspective to change. Yeah? If you know that, so then you have to realize. So what's the point of telling them? Because you want them to be more sensitive. Okay. But if they don't have the capability of being sensitive in general, then you're wasting your time. If you think they can be more sensitive, good. Yeah. It depends on the person. I know certain people I wouldn't even bother. They're going to change. It's the opposite, make it worse. Totally make it worse. Yeah. So if you think it's going to do something, right? Even if it's not going to do anything, but you feel the person has to know, then you should do it. 100%. Show them they shouldn't be so insensitive. That's not a bad thing. Yeah. Any other questions? All right, I'm gonna stop here. I do this every Saturday, 2 o'clock Eastern time, 9 o'clock Israel time. Anyone has any questions? Find me on Facebook at Beyond Orthodox Conversion Judaism, orthodoxconversion.com, or Michael Chaim Kaufman, or Beyond Orthodox Conversion Judaism on YouTube. There I got videos and Q&As, ethics for fathers. Book of Leviticus, having Book of Leviticus tomorrow, 9 o'clock Eastern time, 4 o'clock Israel time. So, or you want to send me an email, rabbichaimkaufman@gmail.com, RBBIChaimCoffman @gmail.com, whichever good. Middle of the day, end of the day.